The moon hung bloated and pale behind a veil of autumn mist, casting a sickly glow over the Carter family's stone cottage. Inside, the hearth fire had dwindled to embers, leaving the kitchen draped in shadows that danced across the worn wooden table. Evelyn Grace Carter's fingers were raw and chapped from the lye soap as she scrubbed the last of the dinner plates. The water had grown cold hours ago, numbing her hands until she could barely feel the cloth between her fingers. A draft whistled through the cracks in the window frame, carrying with it the scent of pine and frost from the forest beyond the village boundary. Winter approached early this year. Evelyn could taste it in the air, metallic and sharp. The same taste that always preceded the offering. From the sitting room, her sister's laughter spilled like warm honey, sweet and exclusive. Charlotte's voice rose above the others, melodic and practiced. Even her casual conversation sounded like song. The twins, Harper and Lila, giggled in unison at something Vivian had whispered. None acknowledged the absence of their fifth sister. Evelyn's throat constricted with the familiar ache of words unsaid. Not that they would have listened, even if she could speak. 17 years of silence had rendered her invisible to her family, except when chores needed doing. She dried her hands on her apron, wincing as the rough fabric caught on a fresh cut across her palm, a reminder of this morning's work chopping kindling. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she moved to stoke the kitchen fire. The sound of horses and carriage wheels crunching over the gravel path outside made her freeze. Her heart stuttered against her ribs. Visitors at this hour could only mean one thing. The knocker fell against the front door with 3 deliberate strikes that echoed through the cottage like a funeral bell. The laughter in the sitting room died instantly. "It's time," came Vivian's voice, suddenly stripped of its earlier mirth. Evelyn pressed herself against the kitchen wall, willing the shadows to swallow her whole. Her lungs burned as she held her breath, listening to the rustle of her sister's dresses as they moved to answer the door. The scent of lavender water and beeswax polish mingled with her fear, making her dizzy. She knew what awaited them all. Every 7 years, the king in the dark forest selected a bride from among the village's eligible daughters. None ever returned. "Evelyn!" Charlotte's voice cut through the silence. "Stop hiding and come here at once! Captain Collins has arrived with the summons!" Reluctantly, Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, keeping her eyes fixed on the uneven floorboards. The captain stood in the entryway, his uniform immaculate despite the mist outside. His gloved hands clutched a scroll bearing the royal seal, black wax impressed with the image of a crown entwined with thorns. "Good evening, ladies," Captain Collins said, his voice betraying no emotion. "By decree of His Majesty, King Adrian Blackwell, all eligible maidens are to present themselves at the village square tomorrow at sunset for the offering ceremony." Vivian stepped forward, her green silk dress rustling. At 22, she was the eldest and most ambitious of the Carter sisters. "Captain, we are honored. The Carter family has 5 daughters to present." The captain's gaze swept over them, lingering momentarily on Evelyn's plain dress and work-roughened hands. "All 5 must attend," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "His Majesty insists that no eligible maiden be excluded, regardless of circumstance." A heavy silence fell over the room. Evelyn felt her sister's eyes upon her, Charlotte's narrowed in calculation, the twins wide with indignation, Vivian's cold with displeasure. "Surely you don't mean Evelyn," Charlotte said with a tinkling laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "She's hardly suitable. She cannot even speak." Captain Collins cleared his throat. His Majesty's instructions were explicit. All maidens between 16 and 25 years must attend. He handed the scroll to Vivian. The ritual requirements are detailed within. Prepare accordingly. After the captain departed, Charlotte rounded on Evelyn. This is absurd. What use would the king have for a mute servant? She'll embarrass us all, Lila whispered to Harper, though loudly enough for everyone to hear. Enough, Vivian snapped, unrolling the scroll. Her eyes scanned the parchment, widening slightly. The king will communicate with each maiden telepathically. The room fell silent again. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears. Telepathically? A strange warmth bloomed in her chest. Hope, unfamiliar and dangerous. It doesn't matter, Charlotte declared, tossing her golden curls. Everyone knows the king chooses based on beauty and grace. The village hasn't offered him someone like her in generations. Vivian studied Evelyn with new consideration. Perhaps we should prepare her anyway. A Carter will be chosen this year. I'm certain of it. We cannot risk offending His Majesty by withholding any of us. Prepare her? Harper scoffed. You might as well try to make a silk purse from a sow's ear. Evelyn's cheeks burned. She curled her fingers into fists, nails digging into her palms until the pain grounded her. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of the forest that bordered their village, dark and dense, hiding the castle where the immortal king had ruled for centuries. We'll do what we must, Vivian decided, rolling up the scroll. Charlotte, find something suitable for her to wear. Twins, you'll manage her hair. I'll instruct her on proper etiquette. She fixed Evelyn with a stern gaze. You will not shame this family. Do you understand? Evelyn nodded once, her jaw clenched tight. In the glass of the curio cabinet, her reflection stared back. A pale face framed by unruly chestnut hair, eyes too large and too knowing for her own good. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers of light struggling through persistent fog. Evelyn had barely slept, her dreams haunted by a voice she couldn't place, deep and resonant, calling her name from the depths of the forest. She rose before her sisters, stoking fires and preparing breakfast as always, despite tomorrow's ceremony. By midday, the Carter household had transformed into a flurry of activity. Charlotte paraded through the sitting room in her third gown of the day, this one a deep sapphire that made her blue eyes appear almost violet. The blue is divine with your coloring, Vivian assessed, circling Charlotte like a hawk. But perhaps the crimson would better catch His Majesty's eye. Evelyn sat forgotten in the corner, mending a tear in Harper's second-best dress. The needle pricked her finger, and a drop of blood welled up, staining the pale fabric. She stifled a gasp, quickly hiding the spot with careful stitches. Evelyn? Charlotte's sharp voice made her start. You're needed upstairs. We might as well attempt to make you presentable. The next hours passed in a blur of indignity. The twins scrubbed her skin until it was raw, tutting over calluses they couldn't remove. They yanked a comb through her tangled hair, each pull bringing tears to her eyes that she refused to shed. It's like trying to tame a wild animal, Harper complained, wrestling with a particularly stubborn knot. At least she's clean now, Lila replied, though I doubt it will make any difference. Charlotte appeared in the doorway with a dress, one of her old ones, faded lavender with yellowing lace at the collar. This will have to do. No sense wasting anything better. The dress was too tight across Evelyn's chest and shoulders from years of physical labor her sister had never performed. The fabric strained at the seams when she moved her arms. Charlotte circled her critically. Well, it's the best we can manage. Remember to keep your head down and stay at the back. With luck, the king won't even notice you're there. Something rebellious flared in Evelyn's chest. She raised her chin, meeting Charlotte's gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years. Charlotte stepped back, momentarily startled by the defiance in her silent sister's eyes. Don't look at me like that, Charlotte hissed. You should be grateful we're including you at all. If it were up to me, you'd stay home where you belong. A knock at the front door interrupted the tension. Vivian's voice called up the stairs. Charlotte, Reverend Walker is here to speak with us about the ceremony. Charlotte gave Evelyn one last, dismissive glance before sweeping from the room. Stay here until we call for you. Left alone, Evelyn moved to the small window that overlooked the back garden and the forest beyond. The mist had thickened throughout the day, curling between the trees like spectral fingers. As she watched, a shadow seemed to move among the trunks, too large to be a deer, too graceful to be a bear. Her breath caught. For an instant, she could have sworn she saw eyes gleaming in the darkness, eyes that saw her, knew her. Evelyn. She jerked back from the window, heart racing. The voice had not been spoken aloud, but had resonated inside her mind. Rich and dark as mulled wine, warm despite its otherworldly timbre. Do not fear, little one. I see you. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the glass. The shadow had vanished, but the presence lingered, a gentle pressure against her consciousness, curious and ancient. Footsteps on the stairs broke the connection. Evelyn stumbled back from the window as Vivian entered, her face taut with strain. The Reverend says this year's ceremony will be different, Vivian said without preamble. The king has requested that each maiden come forward alone to be evaluated. She studied Evelyn's face. You look flushed. Are you ill? Evelyn shook her head quickly. Good. We leave in an hour. Remember everything I told you about proper posture. Vivian paused at the door. And Evelyn? Try not to draw attention to yourself. The king has never chosen anyone damaged. The word struck like a physical blow. Evelyn waited until Vivian's footsteps faded before returning to the window. The forest stood silent and impenetrable, keeping its secrets, but she had heard him. The king had spoken directly into her mind, bridging a gap no human had ever crossed, and he had called her by name. The village square had been transformed. Black candles lined the perimeter, their flames unnaturally still despite the evening breeze. At the center stood a dais draped in crimson velvet, upon which rested an ornate silver throne, empty and waiting. The gathered families formed a circle around this display, their faces tight with the particular tension that comes from fear disguised as celebration. The Carter sisters stood together near the front, a graduated display of feminine beauty. Vivian in emerald silk, Charlotte resplendent in crimson, the twins in matching gowns of pale gold. And behind them, nearly hidden, Evelyn in her faded lavender, the borrowed shoes pinching her toes with every step. Remember, Vivian whispered without turning her head. Speak only if directly addressed. Otherwise, remain silent. Evelyn almost laughed at the irony but kept her face carefully blank. The last rays of sunlight retreated beyond the forest's edge, and with them went the day's warmth. A chill descended that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The crowd's murmuring ceased abruptly as Captain Collins stepped forward, unrolling a proclamation. His Majesty, King Adrian Blackwell, sovereign of the dark forest and protector of the borderlands, approaches. All shall bow in his presence. The forest's edge seemed to ripple, the very air distorting as a procession emerged from between the trees. First came 4 guards, in black armor that absorbed rather than reflected the torchlight. Behind them walked a figure that commanded every eye in the square. King Adrian Blackwell moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his steps silent despite the cobblestones. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore no crown upon his raven hair, which fell to his shoulders in waves. His features were sharply aristocratic. High cheekbones, straight nose, and a mouth that seemed carved from marble. But it was his eyes that held Evelyn transfixed. Eyes of such a deep blue they appeared almost black in the dimming light, ancient and knowing. The crowd sank into deep bows and curtsies as he ascended the dais and took his seat upon the throne. Only then did Evelyn notice the subtle differences that marked him as other, the unnatural stillness with which he held himself, the lack of breath misting in the cold air, the predatory awareness that seemed to extend to every corner of the square. "Rise," he commanded, his spoken voice just as rich as the one that had touched her mind. "I come, as tradition dictates, to select a companion from among your daughters." Captain Collins stepped forward again. "The selection process will begin. When your name is called, approach the dais and await His Majesty's judgment." One by one, the village maidens were summoned. Each approached with varying degrees of terror and hope, standing before the king as he gazed into their eyes. Some lasted mere seconds before being dismissed with a slight shake of his head. Others endured a longer scrutiny, their faces reflecting confusion or discomfort before they too were sent back. "He's speaking to them in their minds," Charlotte whispered, her voice tinged with excitement and fear. "Testing them somehow." When Charlotte's turn came, she glided forward with practiced grace, her crimson gown flowing behind her like spilled wine. She sank into a perfect curtsy before the king, her golden curls catching the candlelight. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. King Adrian leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying as it locked with Charlotte's. Her confident smile faltered, then froze entirely. A full minute passed in silence. Charlotte's face drained of color, and a tremor ran through her shoulders. When the king finally shook his head, she stumbled back as if physically pushed, her composure shattered. The twins fared no better. Harper emerged from her encounter weeping silently, while Lila looked simply bewildered. "Evelyn Grace Carter," Captain Collins called, his voice betraying surprise at reading her name. A path cleared before her. Evelyn felt every eye in the square upon her as she moved forward, the borrowed dress restricting her movements, the too tight shoes making each step painful. She heard the whispers, pitying, mocking, confused. The mute Carter girl, the servant, the damaged one. She kept her gaze on the cobblestones until she stood before the dais. Only then did she lift her eyes to meet the king's. At last came his voice in her mind, clear as crystal and warm as summer rain. "You've kept me waiting, little one." Evelyn's breath caught. The connection between them was immediate and overwhelming. Not the intrusion she had witnessed in her sister's reactions, but a gentle melding, like two streams joining to form a river. "You heard me earlier today, in your room." It wasn't a question. She nodded slightly, aware of the confused murmurs from the crowd at this silent exchange. "Your mind is extraordinary." His mental voice carried a note of wonder. No barriers, no resistance, just pure, unfettered thought. Do you know how rare that is? Evelyn's confusion must have shown on her face, for his lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Most humans guard their thoughts jealously, building walls I must break through to communicate. But you... The king rose from his throne and descended the steps until he stood directly before her. "Your mind welcomes mine as if it were made to do so." He was close enough now that she could see the faint pattern in his irises, not solid blue-black, but shot through with silver, like stars in a midnight sky. His scent enveloped her, cedar and cloves and something older, primal. "Tell me, Evelyn Grace Carter, why do you not speak?" The question sent a jolt of panic through her. Her hands rose instinctively to her throat. fingers trembling. No, don't fear. Show me instead. His presence in her mind deepened, gentle but insistent, like water seeking its level. Memories rose unbidden, a childhood illness, fever burning through her small body, her screams turning to whispers and then to nothing as her vocal cords withered. The years of silence that followed, the gradual erasure of her personhood as her family relegated her to servitude, her worth diminished by her inability to speak. The king's expression darkened as he witnessed these memories, a flash of something dangerous crossing his features. When he spoke again in her mind, his voice carried an undercurrent of controlled rage. They treated you as less. They were wrong. He raised his hand, long fingers hovering near her face without touching. The crowd gasped collectively, recognizing the gesture of selection. Evelyn heard Charlotte's indignant cry, Vivian's sharp intake of breath. I have searched for centuries, the king continued, his mental voice for her alone. For a mind that could truly hear mine, for a soul that would not shrink from what I am. I had nearly abandoned hope. Behind them, Reverend Walker stepped forward. Your Majesty, there must be some mistake. This girl is mute. Surely you would prefer... Silence. The king did not raise his voice, yet the command cracked like a whip. I have made my choice. He returned his attention to Evelyn, his gaze softening imperceptibly. You have lived in silence among those who never tried to hear you. I offer you a different silence, one filled with understanding. Will you come with me, Evelyn Grace Carter? Will you leave this place of small minds and smaller hearts? Evelyn stood transfixed, caught between terror and a desperate, wild hope. This immortal being had looked into her mind, had seen all that she was, and still wanted her. Not Charlotte with her beauty, not Vivian with her ambition, but her, Evelyn, the silent, invisible one. The king extended his hand, palm up in invitation. There is much I would share with you, much I would teach you about the power that lies dormant within you, but the choice must be yours. From the edge of her awareness, Evelyn heard her sister's protests growing louder, felt the village's collective shock like a physical pressure against her skin. The borrowed dress suddenly felt like a costume, a poor disguise she no longer needed. She raised her hand, fingers trembling, and placed it in the king's. His skin was cool, but not cold, firm and strong as he closed his fingers around hers. Brave little one, he murmured in her mind. Do you know what happens now? Evelyn shook her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. The king's lips curved into a smile that transformed his severe features, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the immortal facade. He leaned closer, his breath cool against her ear as he whispered words meant only for her. Now, Evelyn Grace Carter, I take you home. And together, we discover why your thoughts have been calling to mine since the day you were born. The word hung in the air like a suspended crystal, catching the moonlight that filtered through the trees surrounding the village square. I felt a strange sensation, as if the world around me was dissolving at its edges. The king, Adrian, tightened his grip on my hand, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift. The angry faces of the villagers, the horrified expressions of my sisters, all began to blur like watercolors in the rain. Hold tight to me, Adrian murmured, his voice both in my ear and echoing inside my mind. The first crossing can be disorienting. A wind that hadn't been there moments before whipped around us, carrying the scent of pine and something older, something that reminded me of ancient stones and starlight. I closed my eyes against its force, pressing myself instinctively closer to Adrian's solid form. The sounds of the village, the shouts, the gasps, Charlotte's shrill protests, faded like a retreating tide, replaced by a rushing in my ears that reminded me of standing beneath a waterfall. When the rushing stopped, I opened my eyes to find myself standing in a vast entrance hall. Moonlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating marble floors and a sweeping staircase that curved upward like the inside of a seashell. The air here was different. Cooler, cleaner, carrying subtle notes of beeswax and old books. "Welcome to Blackwell Manor," Adrian said, releasing my hand but remaining close. His eyes, those impossible silver eyes, studied my face with an intensity that made my skin tingle. "My home for the past 3 centuries, and now yours, if you wish it to be." I turned slowly, taking in the grandeur around me. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and mythical creatures adorned the walls. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, their facets catching and multiplying the moonlight. It was beautiful, but also overwhelming, like stepping into one of the fairy tales my mother had read to me as a child, before illness had taken her and left us at our father's indifferent mercy. "Are you afraid?" Adrian's voice in my mind was gentle, respectful of the boundaries of my thoughts. I considered the question, my fingers unconsciously moving to touch the hollow of my throat, where my voice had once lived. Was I afraid? Yes. But not of him, strangely enough. I was afraid of this vast unknown stretching before me, afraid that this was some elaborate dream from which I would wake to find myself back in my cramped attic room. "No," I finally answered, the word forming in my mind with surprising clarity. "Not of you." A smile touched the corners of his mouth, softening the aristocratic planes of his face. "Good. Fear has its uses, but not between us." He gestured toward the staircase. "You must be exhausted. I've had rooms prepared for you." I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my surprise. How could he have prepared rooms when he hadn't known I would come with him? Adrian's smile widened, revealing the barest hint of his fangs. "I hoped, Evelyn. Hope is something I had almost forgotten until I first heard your thoughts reaching out across the void." He offered his arm in a courtly gesture. "May I show you to your chambers?" I hesitated only a moment before placing my hand on his forearm. The fabric of his coat was fine beneath my fingertips, and beneath that, I could feel the solid strength of him. He led me up the staircase, our footsteps echoing in the silence of the great house. "You're wondering about the others like me," Adrian said as we reached the landing. "You're wondering if you should fear them, if they will look at you and see only prey." I nodded, unable to deny the thought that had indeed been flitting through my mind. "There are others of my kind, yes. Some reside within these walls, others in territories nearby. But none will harm you." His expression darkened slightly. "You are under my protection now. That means something in our world." We walked down a long corridor lined with portraits, men and women with the same otherworldly beauty Adrian possessed, though none with his particular intensity. I found myself studying their faces, looking for cruelty or kindness, for some hint of what I had stepped into. "My ancestors," Adrian explained, following my gaze, "and some of my kin. Our lineage stretches back farther than human records." He paused before a portrait of a woman with copper-colored hair and a gentle smile. "This was Amelia, my mate." The word "was" hung heavy in the air between us. I looked at him questioningly. "She was taken from me nearly a century ago." His voice was carefully neutral, but I could feel the edges of his grief brushing against my mind like dark wings. "Humans, led by a man who fancied himself a hunter of our kind. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing his sleeve in a gesture of sympathy. Adrian looked down at my hand, then back to my face, surprise flickering across his features. "You are unusual, Evelyn Grace Carter. Most humans would rejoice at the death of one like us." I shook my head firmly. Loss was loss, pain was pain. I had seen enough of both in my short human life to recognize their universality. We continued down the corridor until Adrian stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate vines and flowers. "These will be your rooms. You may come and go as you please. The manor is yours to explore. But I would ask that you not venture beyond the grounds without an escort. There are complications in the territories beyond that I must explain to you when you've rested." He pushed open the doors, revealing a suite that was larger than my family's entire home. A four-poster bed draped in midnight blue velvet dominated one wall. A sitting area with plush chairs faced a fireplace where flames crackled merrily. Another door stood ajar, revealing glimpses of a bathing chamber with a copper tub. "I'll have food brought up," Adrian said, remaining in the doorway as I stepped inside, my fingers trailing over the silken bed covers in wonder. "Is there anything specific you require?" I turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how strange this all was. How quickly my life had transformed from one of servitude and invisibility to whatever this was. I shook my head, unable to think of anything I needed beyond the luxury already surrounding me. Why me? The question formed in my mind before I could stop it, pushing past the barriers of my usual caution. Adrian's expression grew serious. "Because your mind called to mine across distances that should have made such contact impossible. Because when I looked into your thoughts, I saw a strength and resilience that reminded me of what I once was, before immortality made me cold." He paused, his silver eyes seeming to look through me rather than at me. "And because there is something within you, Evelyn, something dormant but powerful, that I have not encountered in a human for many lifetimes." With that cryptic statement, he bowed slightly. "Rest now. We will speak more when the sun sets again." The doors closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in my new chambers, surrounded by more luxury than I had ever known, with more questions than I had ever had. I moved to the window, pulling back heavy curtains to reveal a view of expansive gardens bathed in moonlight. Beyond them, dense forests stretched into the distance, their dark silhouettes a reminder of how far I now was from the village that had never truly been my home. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, I found not Adrian, but a young woman with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of amber. She wasn't human. I could tell by the fluid grace of her movements and the faint luminescence of her skin in the dim corridor. "I'm Alara," she said, her voice melodic. "I've brought you something to eat, and some clothes that might fit you better than that borrowed dress." She carried a tray in one hand, and draped over her arm were several garments in shades of green and blue. I stepped back to allow her entry, watching as she set the tray on a small table near the fireplace and laid the clothes carefully across the bed. "The king said you don't speak," Alara continued, turning to face me, "but that you can hear his thoughts, and he yours. That's remarkable. In all my 80 years here, I've never known him to form such a connection with a human." I raised my eyebrows at 80 years. She looked no older than 20. Alara laughed, the sound like small bells. "I'm young for our kind, barely more than a fledgling. The king is ancient by comparison." She moved toward the door, then paused. "He's different since he found you. There's a light in his eyes that hasn't been there since She trailed off, then shook her head. Well, it's not my place to speak of such things. Eat, rest. Dawn comes soon, and with it, the household will quiet as most of us retire. After she left, I examined the tray she'd brought. Bread still warm from the oven, a bowl of soup that smelled of herbs and chicken, a small pot of honey, and sliced apples. Simple fare, but more appetizing than anything I'd been allowed to eat in my father's house, where the best portions always went to my sisters. As I ate, I considered my situation. I had left everything I knew to follow a vampire king to his manor in the woods. By any rational measure, I should be terrified. Yet instead, I felt something dangerously close to hope stirring in my chest. Here, at least, no one looked through me as if I were invisible. Here, my silence wasn't a source of mockery, but simply accepted as part of who I was. And Adrian, the way he looked at me, as if he could see parts of me that even I didn't know existed. The way his mind touched mine, respectful but intimate in a way that made my heart race. I finished my meal and changed into a nightdress of soft cotton, marveling at how it felt against my skin after years of coarse, patched garments. The bed, when I finally slipped between its covers, embraced me like a cloud. I expected to lie awake, my mind too full of the day's extraordinary events to find rest. Instead, exhaustion claimed me almost instantly, pulling me down into dreams filled with silver eyes and whispered promises. I woke to the soft glow of late, afternoon light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, the luxurious surroundings unfamiliar after a lifetime of austerity. Then memory returned. The village square, Adrian's offer, the strange journey to this place. A fresh set of clothes had been laid out while I slept. A dress of deep forest green with a fitted bodice and flowing skirts. Simpler than the borrowed finery I'd worn to the festival, but far finer than anything I'd ever owned. Beside it lay a silver brush and mirror, a pair of soft leather slippers, and a note written in an elegant, slanting hand. When you are ready, come down to the library. Second floor, east wing. A. I dressed carefully, marveling at how the fabric seemed made for my form, neither too tight nor too loose. The mirror revealed a stranger. My hair, usually dulled by poor nutrition and harsh soap, shone in the afternoon light, and my eyes seemed brighter, more alive. Finding the library proved less challenging than I'd feared. The manor, for all its size, had a logical layout, and servants, or whatever their equivalent was in a household of immortals, nodded respectfully as I passed, some even offering small smiles. The library doors stood open, revealing a 2-story room lined with more books than I had ever seen in one place. Ladders on rails provided access to the highest shelves, and comfortable reading nooks were tucked between the stacks. Tall windows let in the fading daylight, and a fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace. Adrian stood with his back to me, examining a large map spread across a table. He wore simpler clothing than the previous night, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark trousers, and boots. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the pale nape of his neck. "Did you rest well?" he asked without turning, and I realized he had sensed my presence somehow. I moved further into the room, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "Yes," I answered in my mind, directing the thought toward him as I had the night before. He turned then, his silver eyes sweeping over me in a way that made heat rise to my cheeks. "The color suits you," he said, gesturing to the dress. "Ilara has a good eye." I glanced down at the dress, then back at him with a small smile of thanks. "Come," Adrian said, indicating the map. There are things you should know about your new home and its surroundings. I approached the table, standing close enough to see the map, but with careful space between us. It showed the manor and its grounds in the center, surrounded by forests, with villages, including my own, marked at the edges. Blackwell territory extends to these boundaries, Adrian explained, tracing a line that encompassed a substantial area. Within these borders, my word is law, and those of my kind who reside here answer to me. Beyond, his finger moved to areas marked with different symbols. These are territories held by other vampire lords. Some are allies, others are not. I studied the map, noting the proximity of some of these other territories to human settlements. My village was closer to a boundary than I had realized. "You're wondering about your family," Adrian said, his voice gentle. I looked up at him, surprised. I hadn't been thinking of my family specifically, but now that he mentioned them, concern flickered through me. Not for my father or sisters, who had never shown me kindness, but for the village itself, for the children who had sometimes smiled at me when their parents weren't watching, for old Mrs. Henley who had slipped me extra bread when I came to buy the family's groceries. They are safe for now, Adrian continued, but there have been incidents at the borders recently, disappearances, livestock found drained, signs that suggest rogue vampires, those who acknowledge no lord and follow no laws but their own appetites. My eyes widened at this information. Is that why you were at the festival? Because of these rogues? A shadow crossed Adrian's face. Partly. I was investigating reports of unusual activity near your village. But I had not expected. He paused, his gaze intensifying. I had not expected to find you, Evelyn Grace Carter. To hear your thoughts reaching out, untrained but powerful. I frowned, not understanding. My thoughts had been reaching out? I had simply been standing in the crowd, watching my sisters dance, nursing the familiar ache of exclusion. You don't realize what you did, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your mind called to mine across distances that should have made such contact impossible for a human. It drew me to you like a beacon in darkness. He reached out slowly, giving me time to withdraw if I wished, and brushed his fingers lightly across my cheek. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of something I couldn't name. There is power in you, dormant but stirring. Power that reminds me of legends from the earliest days of my kind. A crash from somewhere outside the library interrupted the moment. Adrian's head snapped toward the door, his body tensing like a predator scenting danger. Stay here, he commanded, moving with inhuman speed toward the sound. I hesitated only briefly before following, my curiosity overriding caution. In the grand entrance hall, a scene of chaos greeted me. The massive front doors stood open, and several figures were carrying in what appeared to be injured people. Humans, bleeding and unconscious. Get them to the East Wing, Adrian was directing, his voice sharp with authority. Nathaniel, attend to the worst first. Ilara, fetch blood from the stores. They'll need transfusions. A tall man with spectacles, Nathaniel presumably, was already examining one of the victims, his movements quick and precise. This one's been nearly drained, he reported grimly. Puncture wounds to the neck and wrists. Classic feeding pattern, but sloppy. Whoever did this wasn't concerned with discretion. I moved closer, my medical knowledge, limited though it was from helping our village healer, urging me forward. One of the victims was a young woman not much older than myself, her face ashen, her breathing shallow. Adrian noticed me and frowned. Evelyn, I asked you to stay in the library. I ignored him, kneeling beside the young woman and checking her pulse. It was thready and weak, but present. I looked up at Adrian, then at Nathaniel, trying to convey my desire to help. Nathaniel glanced between us, his eyebrows raised. This is the human you brought back? The mute one? Adrian nodded curtly. Evelyn, this is Dr. Nathaniel Reeves. He serves as physician to both my household and the human settlements under my protection. If she has medical knowledge, we could use the help, Nathaniel said, already turning his attention to another victim. There are 5 of them, all from the logging camp at the north edge of the territory. I looked questioningly at Adrian, who hesitated before nodding. Very well, but be careful. These attacks. He glanced at the victims, his expression darkening. They're not random. They're a message. For the next several hours, I worked alongside Nathaniel and several others, cleaning wounds, applying bandages, and helping to administer what I recognized as a primitive form of blood transfusion. The victims had all been attacked in the same manner, brutal feeding that had left them barely alive, with distinctive bite marks that Nathaniel examined with growing concern. These weren't made by rogues, he said quietly to Adrian when we had stabilized the last victim. The pattern is too consistent, too deliberate. This was organized. Adrian's face was a mask of controlled fury. Silas, he said, the name like a curse on his lips. You can't know that for certain, Nathaniel cautioned, though he didn't sound convinced by his own words. Who else would dare? Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He's testing the boundaries, seeing how I'll respond, using these innocents as pawns in his games. I touched Adrian's arm lightly, drawing his attention. Who is Silas? I asked, the question forming clearly in my mind. Adrian's expression softened slightly as he looked at me. Lord Silas Morrison. He rules the territory to the north. He was once an ally. Now he seeks to expand his holdings, and he resents the protection I extend to the human settlements within my borders. Why? I pressed, genuinely curious. Why would one vampire lord care if another protected humans? Because Silas believes humans exist solely as a food source, that protecting them, living alongside them, as anything other than predator to prey, weakens our kind. Adrian's voice was bitter. He has never forgiven me for the treaties I established after the last vampire wars, guaranteeing safety to humans who dwell within our territories in exchange for willing blood donations. The implications of this sank in slowly. Adrian's protection of humans wasn't merely a personal preference. It was policy, one that had apparently created enemies among his own kind. The logging camp had no warning, Nathaniel added, cleaning blood from his hands with a cloth. According to the one conscious survivor, the attackers came just before dawn when most were still sleeping. Adrian turned to me, his expression grave. Do you understand now, Evelyn? This is the world you've entered. Beautiful, yes, but dangerous. There are forces at work here that have existed for centuries, conflicts that simmer beneath the surface of the peace I've tried to build. I nodded slowly. I understood better than he might think. The politics of power, the use of the vulnerable as pawns. These were dynamics I had witnessed in my own home, if on a much smaller scale. What will you do? I asked. What I must, Adrian replied, his voice hardening. Respond to this provocation without triggering open war. Strengthen the protections around vulnerable settlements. He paused, his gaze intense. And accelerate your training. My training? The power within you, Evelyn. It needs to be awakened, harnessed, especially now. He glanced at the injured humans, his expression troubled. I had hoped for more time, but Silas's move changes things. If he learns of your existence, of what you might become. He didn't finish the thought, but the gravity in his voice told me enough. Whatever this dormant power was that Adrian sensed in me, it was significant enough to make me a target. Rest now, Adrian said, his tone gentler. You've done good work here. We'll speak more of this tomorrow, when these people are stable and I've sent word to the other settlements to increase their vigilance. I nodded, suddenly aware of how tired I was. The emotional and physical demands of the day had drained me more than I'd realized. As I turned to leave, Adrian caught my hand, his cool fingers encircling my wrist with surprising gentleness. Thank you. His voice whispered in my mind. The first time he had initiated such contact rather than simply responding to mine. For helping them. For showing compassion when many of my kind would have seen only food. The intimacy of his mental voice, the way it seemed to caress the inside of my mind, sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. I squeezed his hand briefly before withdrawing, hoping the gesture conveyed what I couldn't say aloud, that I understood more than he might think, and that I wasn't afraid of the world I had entered. That night, as I lay in my luxurious bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the manor settling around me, I found myself thinking of Adrian's words about the power he sensed within me. What did it mean? Was it connected to my muteness, to the strange dreams I'd had since childhood of flying through starlit skies on wings made of shadow? I was drifting towards sleep when a sound jerked me fully awake. A high, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It rose in pitch until it became almost unbearable, then cut off abruptly, leaving a silence that rang in my ears. Evelyn. Adrian's voice crashed into my mind with desperate urgency. Hide! He's found us! The mental connection severed as suddenly as it had formed, leaving me alone in the darkness. Heart pounding, as something heavy struck the manor walls with enough force to make the windows rattle in their frames. I threw myself from the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor as another tremendous crash shook the manor. Instinct drove me to the wardrobe where I crouched, pulling the heavy door nearly closed. Through the crack, I watched as my window exploded inward, showering the room with glass that glittered like deadly diamonds in the moonlight. A tall figure climbed through the broken window with unnatural grace. Silas Morrison. His pale face was twisted with malice, eyes glowing red in the darkness. Behind him, the night air filled with the sound of beating wings and inhuman shrieks. I smell you, little mute, he hissed, nostrils flaring. The human pet Adrian has grown so fond of. I pressed deeper into the wardrobe, my hand closing around a forgotten fire poker leaning against the wall. My fingers tightened around the iron as Silas stalked closer. The bedroom door burst open. Adrian stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. Blood streaked his shirt. Not his own, I realized with a chill. You dare! Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate the very air. You dare attack my home, my people. Silas smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed wetly. The council grows tired of your humanitarian approach, Blackwell. They've sanctioned this correction. The council? Adrian laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You mean Marcus Claiborne's faction. Don't insult my intelligence. They moved so quickly, I could barely track them. Blurs of motion colliding with bone-crushing force. Furniture splintered as they threw each other against walls and floor. I clutched my makeshift weapon, knowing it would be useless against such power, but unwilling to remain defenseless. A mental touch brushed against my consciousness. Stay hidden. Others are coming. The warning had barely registered when 3 more vampires climbed through the shattered window. 2 males and a female, all with the same predatory grace as Silas. The female spotted me instantly, her head snapping toward the wardrobe with unnerving precision. "Found the pet," she called, voice lilting with cruel amusement. I burst from my hiding place, swinging the poker with all my strength. It connected with her temple with a satisfying crack, sending her staggering sideways. The momentary advantage was all I had. She recovered almost instantly, eyes blazing with rage. "You'll pay for that, human!" she snarled, lunging toward me. A blur of movement intercepted her. Dr. Reeves, his usually kind face transformed by vampiric features. He caught the female attacker by the throat and hurled her across the room. "Run, Evelyn!" he shouted. I didn't hesitate, darting past the struggling vampires and into the hallway. Sounds of combat echoed throughout the manor. Crashes, inhuman screams, the splintering of wood. Adrian's household was under full attack. I raced down the corridor, my nightgown billowing around my legs. Where could I go? What could I do? I was human, fragile, voiceless. A hand clamped around my arm, yanking me into a darkened room. I fought wildly until a familiar voice whispered, "Evelyn, it's me, Captain Collins." His face was streaked with blood, his uniform torn. "We need to get you out of here. The manor is surrounded." He pressed something cold and heavy into my hand, a silver dagger with strange markings etched into the blade. "This won't kill them, but it'll slow them down. Aim for the heart if you can." A plan formed in my mind. I tugged at his sleeve, pointing down the hallway toward the library. He nodded, understanding my intent without words. Adrian's secret passage. Good thinking. We moved cautiously through the manor's shadows, avoiding the worst of the fighting. Twice we had to hide as vampires swept past, their movements too quick to be natural. Once, Collins had to use his own blade against a snarling attacker who discovered our position. The vampire fell back, clutching a wound that smoked and hissed. The library door hung from broken hinges. Inside, books lay scattered across the floor, shelves toppled. I rushed to the far wall, running my fingers along the ornate woodwork until I found the hidden catch. A section of the bookcase swung inward, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. Collins hesitated. I should go back, help the others. I shook my head vehemently, gripping his arm. I needed him. Adrian needed him alive. "You're right," he conceded. "Someone has to get you to safety." We descended into the cool darkness, the sounds of battle fading behind us. The passage was ancient, smelling of damp stone and earth. Our path twisted beneath the manor grounds, occasionally branching. Collins seemed to know the way, leading us unerringly through the labyrinth. "Adrian showed me these tunnels when I first agreed to help him," he explained quietly. "They lead all the way to the village and beyond. Some are older than the manor itself." My mind raced with questions I couldn't voice. Why this attack now? What had changed? As if reading my thoughts, Collins continued. "This isn't just about Adrian's protection of humans. There's something else." He glanced at me. "Something about you." The tunnel widened into a small chamber with 3 branching paths. Collins paused, frowning. "Some should take the eastern route toward the forest. The village might not be safe." A shadow detached itself from the darkness ahead, materializing into Marcus Claiborne's aristocratic form. His customary elegant attire was replaced by clothing suited for combat, and his eyes gleamed with triumph. "Captain Collins," he said smoothly. "How disappointing to find you playing traitor to your own kind." Collins pushed me behind him, raising his blade. "My loyalty is to those who protect the innocent, not those who prey on them. Claiborne's laugh echoed in the stone chamber. Noble sentiments, misguided but noble. His gaze shifted to me, and the mute servant girl, Adrian's latest project. I clutched my silver dagger tightly, my knuckles white with tension. Did he tell you why you're so special, little Evelyn? Claiborne took a step closer. Did he tell you what flows in your veins? Collins lunged forward, blade slashing toward Claiborne's chest. The vampire moved with blinding speed, catching Collins's wrist and twisting until bones cracked. The captain cried out, dropping to his knees as Claiborne casually tossed the silver dagger aside. Humans, he sighed. So fragile. I didn't think. I moved on instinct, driving my own dagger toward Claiborne's back. He sensed me coming, turning with supernatural reflexes, but not quite fast enough. The silver blade sank into his shoulder instead of his heart. Claiborne howled, more in rage than pain. He backhanded me with enough force to send me flying across the chamber. My back hit stone, driving the breath from my lungs. Through blurred vision, I saw him advancing, plucking the dagger from his shoulder with a grimace. I was going to make this quick, he snarled, but now I think I'll take my time. A thunderous roar shook the tunnel, and the air itself seemed to ripple. Adrian appeared at the chamber entrance, his clothing torn and bloody, his eyes glowing with an inner fire I'd never seen before. Behind him stood Dr. Reeves and several others from the household, all bearing signs of fierce combat. Marcus, Adrian's voice was deadly calm. You've made your last mistake. Claiborne smiled thinly. Have I? Or have you made yours, keeping secrets about this girl? He gestured toward me. The council will never allow another hybrid bloodline to emerge. You know this. Hybrid? The word echoed in my mind, stirring something deep and forgotten. The council has no authority over her, Adrian replied. She is under my protection. Protection? Claiborne laughed. Or are you simply ensuring your own progeny? Adrian moved so quickly he seemed to vanish, reappearing with his hand around Claiborne's throat. You know nothing of my intentions. I know enough, Claiborne choked out. Her grandmother escaped your brother's clutches 60 years ago. The bloodline was thought lost until our trackers found her, the last descendant of Amelia's sister. The name struck me like a physical blow. Amelia, Adrian's lost mate. My grandmother had never spoken of her past, had taken our family history to her grave. But the dreams I'd had since childhood, the strange connection I'd felt to Adrian from the first moment. Adrian's grip tightened. You will never touch her. It's already too late, Claiborne gasped, a bloody smile spreading across his face. The village burns as we speak. Her sisters, that preacher she's so fond of, all will die tonight unless you release me. Horror washed through me. My family, the villagers, innocent people caught in a supernatural war they didn't understand. I struggled to my feet, swaying with pain and fear. Adrian's eyes met mine across the chamber, his expression torn between rage and anguish. I'm sorry. His voice whispered in my mind. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I shook my head, stepping forward on unsteady legs. I reached out, not physically but mentally, pushing through the barrier of my muteness to touch his consciousness with mine. The village. We must save them. His eyes widened in shock at the strength of my mental voice. Then he nodded once, decisively. Dr. Reeves, he commanded, take Evelyn to safety. The rest of you, with me. He turned back to Claiborne. As for you, the sound of Claiborne's neck snapping echoed in the stone chamber. His body crumpled to the floor, temporarily incapacitated but not yet dead. Only fire or beheading would truly end a vampire of his age. "We'll finish this later," Adrian told the paralyzed vampire. Then to me, "Stay safe. I'll come for you when it's done." I watched him disappear down the tunnel with his allies, heading toward the village. Dr. Reeves gently helped Captain Collins to his feet, the human's wrist already splinted with improvised bandages. "We need to move quickly," Reeves said. "This way." We took the western tunnel, moving as fast as Collins's injury would allow. My mind was a storm of revelations and questions. Hybrid bloodline, Amelia's sister, my grandmother's secrets. "He should have told you," Reeves said quietly as we walked. "About your heritage, about what it means." I gave him a questioning look. "Your grandmother was half vampire, the product of a rare, successful union between Amelia's human sister and Adrian's brother. Such children are vanishingly rare and hunted mercilessly by traditionalists who fear the dilution of vampire bloodlines." He glanced at me. "You're only 1/4 vampire, but that's enough to make you special, to give you abilities that will emerge in time." My muteness, my dreams, the strange connection I'd felt to Adrian, it all began to make terrible sense. We emerged from the tunnel into the forest beyond the manor grounds. The night sky glowed orange with distant flames. The village. I broke into a run, ignoring Reeves's shouts to stop. My family was there, along with everyone I'd known my entire life. I couldn't abandon them, couldn't hide while they suffered. The forest blurred around me as I ran, my bare feet somehow avoiding every stone and thorn. I moved with a speed and grace I'd never possessed before, as if my body was finally awakening to its true nature. I reached the village outskirts to find chaos. Buildings burned, villagers screamed and fled from pale figures that darted through the shadows with predatory precision. Adrian and his allies fought throughout the square, protecting as many humans as they could. But they were outnumbered. My childhood home was ablaze, flames licking at the night sky. Without thinking, I rushed toward it, dodging past a vampire locked in combat with one of Adrian's guards. "Evelyn, no!" Adrian's mental shout reached me, frantic with fear. I ignored him, bursting through the front door into a wall of heat and smoke. "Charlotte!" I tried to call, but no sound emerged from my damaged throat. I pressed forward, covering my mouth with my nightgown. A figure stumbled from the kitchen, Reverend Walker, supporting my sister Vivian. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide with terror. "Evelyn!" she gasped. "The twins! Upstairs!" I pointed to the door, urging them to get out, then turned toward the staircase. Flames had already begun to climb the banister, but I raced up the steps, feeling the wood groan beneath my weight. Harper and Lila's room was filled with smoke, the door hot to the touch. I kicked it open to find my twin sisters huddled by the window, coughing violently. "Evelyn?" Harper stared at me in disbelief. "How did you—" I grabbed their hands, pulling them toward the door. The hallway was now a tunnel of flame, the staircase creaking dangerously. "We can't get through that!" Lila screamed. I looked back at the window, then at my sisters. There was only one way out. I dragged them to the window and pointed down, making jumping motions. "Are you mad?" Harper cried. "We'll break our legs!" A strange certainty filled me. I took their hands again, squeezing reassuringly. Then I climbed onto the windowsill, pulling them with me. "Evelyn, no!" Lila sobbed. I jumped, taking them with me. The night air rushed past us, but instead of plummeting straight down, we seemed to float. Our descent slowed by some force I couldn't understand, but somehow controlled. We landed in the garden with barely a jolt, my sisters staring at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "What are you?" Harper whispered. Before I could respond, a scream cut through the night. Charlotte's voice coming from the village square. I pushed my sisters toward the road out of town, gesturing for them to run, then turned back toward the center of the violence. The square had become a battlefield. Bodies lay scattered, both human and vampire. Adrian fought in the center, a whirlwind of lethal grace as he faced 3 attackers at once. Near the well, Charlotte struggled in the grip of a female vampire, the same one I'd struck with the poker. I ran forward, grabbing a fallen branch as I went. The wood was heavy in my hands, one end splintered to a jagged point. The female vampire saw me coming and laughed, tightening her grip on Charlotte's throat. "Come to save your pretty sister," she taunted. "How touching." Charlotte's eyes found mine, wide with terror and confusion. This sister who had tormented me, belittled me, made my life a misery. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered. I lunged forward, driving the makeshift stake toward the vampire's chest. She released Charlotte to defend herself, but misjudged my speed. The wood pierced her heart, not deeply enough to kill, but enough to incapacitate. She fell back, shrieking in pain and outrage. Charlotte stared at me, rubbing her bruised throat. "Evelyn? How did you—" A blur of movement caught my eye. Adrian, thrown across the square by his attackers. He hit the ground hard, momentarily stunned. The 3 vampires converged on him, victory in their eyes. Something snapped inside me, a dam breaking, power rushing through channels long dormant. I ran toward Adrian faster than human legs should carry me. One of the attackers turned, surprised by my approach. I caught him with strength I shouldn't possess, my hands closing around his throat. "Get away from him!" My mind screamed, and to my shock, the vampire's eyes widened as if he'd heard me. I threw him aside like a doll, positioning myself between Adrian and his remaining attackers. They hesitated, confusion evident in their inhuman eyes. "What is this?" one hissed. "What are you?" Adrian rose behind me, his hand finding mine. Power surged between us, a circuit completing. Together, his mind whispered to mine. The attackers broke and ran, suddenly aware they faced something beyond their understanding. Around the village, the remaining invaders were retreating, melting into the night as quickly as they had come. In the sudden quiet, I became aware of the villagers watching us. My sisters, Reverend Walker, Captain Collins, supported by Dr. Reeves, all staring at me with new eyes. I felt exposed, my hidden nature revealed in the most public way possible. Adrian's fingers tightened around mine. "It's all right," he assured me. "I won't let them hurt you." But it wasn't their fear of me I dreaded. It was their rejection. These people who had known me all my life, who had pitied the mute servant girl, would now see me as something inhuman, something to be feared. To my surprise, it was Charlotte who approached first. Her face, usually so perfect and composed, was streaked with tears and soot. She stopped before me, searching my eyes. "You saved me," she said simply. "After everything I've done to you." I nodded, my free hand rising to touch her cheek in forgiveness. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "What they were saying about you? About grandmother?" I looked to Adrian, uncertain how to explain what I barely understood myself. "Your sister carries a rare bloodline," he said, addressing not just Charlotte but all the gathered villagers. "One that bridges our worlds. She is neither fully human nor vampire, but something unique, something precious." Reverend Walker stepped forward, his expression troubled. "The Lord made mankind in his image. What you describe is an abomination." "Is it?" Adrian challenged. "Or is it evolution, adaptation, the next step in both our kind's journey?" He looked around at the burning village. Tonight you've seen the worst of vampire kind, but you've also seen allies among us who fought to protect you, who died to protect you. He gestured to several fallen vampires who had been part of his household. The world is changing, he continued. The old divisions cannot stand. Evelyn represents a future where our kinds might coexist, even unite. I felt the weight of every gaze upon me. The girl who had never had a voice suddenly thrust into the position of symbol, of bridge between worlds. It was too much, too fast. You don't have to be their savior tonight. Adrian's mind touched mine. Just be yourself. That's enough. I squeezed his hand gratefully, then stepped toward my family. One by one, I embraced them, even Charlotte, whose arms wrapped around me with surprising strength. When I reached Reverend Walker, I saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between dogma and the evidence before him. I don't understand what you are, he admitted. But I know who you are. Your heart remains pure, Evelyn Grace Carter. Perhaps that's all that truly matters. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of the village, Adrian and his people helped the humans salvage what they could. The dead were laid out with dignity, human and vampire alike. Plans were made for rebuilding, for creating something new from the ashes of the old order. I found myself standing at the edge of the forest, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Adrian joined me, his presence a comfort I no longer questioned. What happens now? He asked aloud, respecting my preference for silence. I turned to him, reaching for his mind with mine. The connection came easily now, as natural as breathing. We build something new, something better. His smile was tinged with wonder. Together? I nodded, taking his hand once more. In the distance, birds began to sing, their voices clear and sweet in the morning air. For the first time in my life, my silence felt not like a prison, but like a choice. One path among many now open to me. Together, I agreed, as the sun rose on the first day of our new world.